Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. That was my cue per AAIM that we're being recorded and we can go. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Rae Witt. I'm one of our associate program directors for the internal medicine residency here at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Before I turn over the screen to my co-presenters to introduce themselves, I just want to give you a quick 1-2-minute backstory about the motivation behind this. I've been in my current role for about 5 years, and resident retreats have become a little bit of a passion project for me. And this is for a few reasons. We have found here through some successes and maybe some failures, that resident retreats meet this very nice niche function that allow us to address curriculum gaps that sometimes can be hard to address and creatively and successfully. They allow for easily modifiable changes every single year. They provide a really nice avenue for an emphasis on camaraderie and wellness, which I think we can all agree has been lost a little bit over the last few years with the pandemic. And then as a nice side effect, they are great photo opportunities, which I think we've all found out is important with this era of virtual recruitment and our social media platforms and our virtual platforms. On the flip side, they do require a little bit of strategy, both from a scheduling perspective and a planning perspective, and there can be some cost associated with that. And so our hope over this hour is to share with you the way that we have learned to approach these. Again, things we've learned along the way, with the hope then that you can take these and implement ideas in your own program. We did choose the Zoom more interactive format for today because we hope that you'll feel comfortable putting questions in the chat as we go. And then we're going to certainly have time at the end for people to unmute themselves or to ask questions towards the end. So please feel free to be thinking about that as we go. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Snow, and I have spent most of my career with internal medicine as the education administrator. I just recently, within the past year, moved to the graduate medical education office, but I worked with internal medicine when they started doing retreats, and then as they've evolved over time, I've helped with the planning of them. Now I will hand it off to Trek.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. Trek Langenhan, Associate Program Director here at Nebraska as well, and have had the opportunity to work with Rae and Erin over the last few years, and perhaps is a bit more curriculum focused, and so provide a little bit more of the background about things that may be appropriate to include. So with regard to objectives today, we're going to talk about I'm going to focus mostly on educational goals and objectives that are essential, but can be difficult to fit into your already jam-packed residency program curriculums. And then Rae's going to talk more about key elements of a successful class-specific retreat, similar to what we hold here. And then Erin is going to kind of close us out with Rae on how to brainstorm ways where you might be able to create and implement retreats or adapt what you already have based on some of the things learned today. So just for a little bit of background, as we know, in the current setting, internal medicine training remains constant at approximately 3 years. And clinical care is only getting more and more complex with a push for shorter hospitalizations, more thorough outpatient visits. So it's getting busier and busier by the day. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic really seems to have impacted undergraduate medical education and perhaps has led to less standardized training backgrounds. That's kind of been our experience with regard to the interns joining our program. And this is particularly relevant for non-clinical care related topics, things that perhaps were easier to cut from you and me during the pandemic and the expectation changes associated with professionalism, timeliness, et cetera. And we think that retreats provide that opportunity to get an entire class in the same room and provide a consistent message, which we find to be really important. So if your program is like ours, sometimes it feels like there's always more to be included in your curriculum, and we're pulled in so many different directions as program directors and program coordinators. Somebody's always asking for more. Hey, can I get in front of your residents? Can I tell them about something else? And so this is the way that we commonly feel here. So this push to include more and more topics in our curriculums comes from various sources. And so I've included a non-inclusive list here, but as we know, the ACGME kind of competencies and requirements are always changing. ABIM has a little bit different perspective on things, and then CLEAR as well. Our health systems and or universities or sponsoring institutions, department chairs, they always may have new ideas or things that they're getting push from their leadership that we need to include in our education. Certification granting authorities, to be a stroke center, to be a heart failure center, to be a diabetes management center, you need to have all of these requirements. Like, we need to get in front of your residents, we need to talk and tell them, we need to do a better job, those kind of things. We also have a lot of survey data, whether it be the ACGME survey or internal program survey, and with virtual recruitment being competitive during the application season is really important. What is these applicants are asking for? What do our current residents want? There's also a lot of societal events and local and regional culture that impact things. And so, for an example, might be opioid prescribing has moved to the forefront of things that we need to continue to include just based on the culture and how things have been going in the local environment. And then you may get that new faculty or somebody that just went to a new training and they want to come back and, hey, look, I'm going to bring this back and hit your audience. And the final thing I'd say on this slide is, we go to Aptum or we follow the Aptum listservs and we come up with all these great ideas or we feel like maybe we're falling behind our peers. And so it's like, where do we fit this into our curriculum? And we find that there is a niche for retreats for some of these things. So this is a long list of just potential areas that you may have heard about or things that we have heard about that we feel like should be included in some manner in our curriculums. And it's like, where do we do this? What is the best method? So I'm sure you are all thinking of a few that are coming to your mind, but this is just a long list that I put together that maybe might spawn some thought on things like, geez, I really feel like I'm getting pressure or we need to include that in our curriculum. So in my final kind of slide here, I just want to point out that some curriculums or topics, those things that we just talked about on that last slide, often don't fit well into other areas or even retreats for that matter. We've really focused over the last few years on including POCUS, which has been nice in our program because we can meld it in with procedure training. So there are curriculums that really do fit well nicely together, but there are a lot of things that don't fit into our kind of standard didactic series slots. And so retreats can be an area for that. Retreats aren't always perfect. It's usually best for smaller or less complex topics, things like checkbox activities or one and done, or other things where you can introduce a topic and then share resources asynchronously, such as mental health or wellness. Large topics with longitudinal follow-up generally don't do well in the retreat format. But it can be a way to follow up an ongoing curriculum that you do have longitudinal follow-up is like a checkpoint. You could use that as one of the sessions in your retreat. And also thinking about your target audience. Sometimes the content you want to deliver is class specific. So we focus on class specific retreats. And so that can be a nice way. Is like, okay, our PGY2s need to know this or our PGY3s need to know that as well. So this is a way you're getting, at least the way we've done it is getting our classes together. And then the final point that I really want to make is you want to make sure your agenda is balanced. And thinking back to our title of this topic today, or our presentation today, is productivity and fun. You don't want your residents to walk away and be like, that was intense, that was a lot, and that wasn't a lot of fun. So you want to think about how you can balance some of these engaging, fun things, interactive, camaraderie building topics with perhaps a few more of the heavier content focused things. So that's something to be very mindful when you're creating your retreats. With that, I'll hand off to Ray.
Okay, so I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so just having fun telling you about the retreats that we have held at UNMC. My big hopes for the next 20 minutes is that you can take away the how and the why between why we've designed these retreats and then how we've actually implemented them. And then also maybe get some ideas of things that you might want to borrow for your own institution. So as Trek mentioned, our retreats are designed to be class specific, and each class retreat has a theme. So our PGY1 retreat is all around that transition to residency and how to set the stage for residency. Our PGY2 retreat is focused on supervisor and leadership training as our second year residents prepare to supervise boards and as they become those upper level residents and will lead their peers. And then our PGY3 or 4 retreat for our MedPeds residents focuses on that transition out of residency successfully. And we're going to spend the most amount of time talking about our PGY1 retreat because this is probably the retreat I've learned the most from, and my hope is that I can spare you from making some of maybe the same mistakes we did early on. So the PGY1 retreat for us happens in August of every single year, and so the vast majority of the focus is on camaraderie building. It's helping residents to start forming connections with one another, start forming relationships, and then setting that stage for the rapport that they're going to want throughout residency. We have found for us in particular that this is a great time to circle back on high yield topics from orientation. I think we have all been there that orientation is like drinking through a fire hose as we try to throw all this mandatory information at our residents. And then we've also found out that 4 months later, they don't remember very much. And so we take this opportunity to circle back on the things that are specific to our program from maybe a GME standpoint, to just say things a second time. A lot of times the content for this section of the retreat is based on what we've seen the previous intern class miss or are not here. And so it's a great way to, again, try to make sure that residents are on the same page with expectations. But the specific things we focus on are the professionalism expectations of our residents. And that includes things like administrative duties, checking your emails frequently, responding to program coordinator things, logging duty hours, evaluations. We also spend time here circling back to GME and program resources so that we know that residents know where they can look when they might need mental health resources, when they're trying to understand their benefits, like those sorts of things that are confusing at the beginning. We have found that in our program, this is a great time to introduce interns to the clinical competency committee and how that works. And then we also go over evaluations. Graduate evaluations are very different than the medical school evaluations in terms of the scale. And so we try to spend time talking about how that differs. We have found that this is a great time to talk about financial planning. For a lot of our interns, this is the first time that they've had a real paycheck, quote unquote. And they have lots of questions at this stage of, do they start paying back their loans, and how do they set a budget, and should they be caring about retirement? And if so, like, how do they go about that? And so we have I would say a lower entry level financial planning session built in. And then the other thing that we found has been really helpful is to use this retreat to set the tone for the culture of our residency so that our interns understand, we're a program that's going to talk about hard things, and we're a program that's here to address whatever concerns you have. And so we try to, again, set that stage and model that at the intern retreat. So I've got 2 different retreat agendas on this next slide. 2016 was the first time we formally launched this retreat. This retreat we just created out of nothing. We thought, hey, we need something to help our interns bond. But the point I want to make on this slide is how much our agenda has changed over the last 6 or 7 years. So when we first launched this, the retreat started at 9 a.m., went until like 7 p.m. It was a long day. And it was much more focused on, I'm going to say the fun, the quote unquote fun. It was all about icebreakers, free time to bond with classmates. We did spend some time on intern expectations and more formal wellness exercises. We also attempted a group kickball game, which I'm going to say got mixed responses from our residents and our faculty, but it was just more fun. So fast forward 6-7 years, we've gotten a lot of feedback since that time, and we've changed up our retreat itinerary quite a bit. The next slide, I'll kind of go over what we've learned not to do, but from that feedback, our most recent retreat had the following itinerary. So we started a little bit later. Still spent time on the introduction and the icebreakers, which I think are critical to get people warmed up and talking. We added this hour called Chief Tips, and how we do this is we break up our residents into teams of 4, and they go around to each chief for 15 minutes apiece. Each chief has a theme, and they just share those high yield tips they wish they would have known when they were an intern, which leads for a lot of low-key discussion. It helps the residents to form relationships with their chiefs, and really, again, sets the stage for the year. Obviously, lunch is important. We go over the intern expectations, like I mentioned, for professionalism. The last 2 years, we have used the Intern to Retreat to launch our diversity, equity, and inclusion curriculum. So we are lucky to have an associate program director in our program who does a monthly series on topics related to justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion in medicine. But if it's your first time hopping in there as an intern, it can be a little intimidating to see this heavier conversation. And so we have her do a lower stakes introduction during the intern retreat to launch that topic, to showcase that, again, we're a program that's going to talk about this, but at a level that's a little bit easier for the interns to step into. We had the financial planning I talked about. And then we always end on a high note, a more fun note. So I'm going to spend time in a few slides talking about the Intern Olympics. They've been really popular the last couple of years, and hopefully that might be something you can take away. So as I mentioned, we found out what residents do not like. I think it's important here to talk about the word retreat. I think when residents hear retreat, they think it's going to be a break from things that are hard. I think that retreat has this positive connotation associated with it. Has some fun. We found out that sometimes residents don't realize that a work retreat means there's going to be some work involved. And so we have to kind of set the expectation from the get-go. But importantly, these were things I wasn't expecting. So we found out residents don't like much unstructured time. Residents already work a lot of hours per week. Their time is very valuable to them, and they want to feel like their time is being used well. And so a little unstructured time for natural bonding and hanging out is great. Too much is just kind of awkward, especially when they're only 2 months into residency and don't know each other very well. We found out they don't like uncomfortable icebreakers. But to be fair, I don't think any of us like uncomfortable icebreakers. They don't like starting too early or taking all day. So again, if they're retreating and they're used to getting up really early, they really like being able to sleep in a little bit. So I usually try to not start these before 9 or 10 a.m. Also, they don't like it when it goes into their evenings if possible, because they might be on a rotation where they're working every evening to begin with. And if they're going to have this day off of clinical work, they might want to just spend the evening with their family. So we try to wrap up the mandatory portions of the retreat by 5 p.m. if we can. And then a lot of times the evening events are optional and they can choose if they want to stay or spend time with their family. They don't like repetitive activities. Just like Trek mentioned, too many heavy activities in a row can just be a little draining. And then I don't know if you guys have had this at your institutions, but we found out that our residents don't like talking about wellness. They want an emphasis on wellness. They want us as a program to care about their wellness. But anytime we've tried to approach wellness in a more systematic manner or a structured manner with reflective activities or small group activities, they tend to not like it. So what I've tried to do is identify with each retreat the areas of wellness that would be best addressed by that retreat. So for example, financial planning in this HO1 retreat, and then indirectly attack that. I think the retreat in and of itself is wellness. It's a break from work. There's some if there's some fun involved, that helps. But I just thought that was an interesting takeaway that we've learned over time. So here are pictures from our PGY1 retreat this past year. We always go off campus for this retreat. It's probably our most expensive retreat, but we think it's helpful to get away from campus for this one. You can see this venue we booked here has really nice indoor-outdoor options. These two pictures demonstrate the small and the large group sessions. What I loved about this venue was it provided a change of scenery, so that as we went through different aspects of the retreat, people could get up, move, change their small groups. It keeps the day from feeling too long. As we're going to mention later, every single retreat we have, we take that as an opportunity to get a group picture. So in this one, I made them take 2 group pictures because one has this fabulous backdrop of Omaha, and I was like, well, that'll look really good on a website. And then the one below was just a different picture. And then we can use those throughout the year. At the end of residency, residents can see their classes change each year. It's fun to have those group pictures over time. Okay, so the last thing I'll talk about with the intern retreat is the Intern Olympics. This was something we created last year, but has been super fun. And so again, I hope you might consider stealing this idea. So we end every intern retreat with this. And just to talk you through it, it's a way to have our residents form teams, start getting to know one another, have fun laughing at each other, and again, a low stakes environment, but with that added element of competition, which I think we all know residents love. So we break our residents into 4 teams. For our residency size, this ends up being about 9 residents per team. And then I give each team 10 minutes to figure out their strategy for attacking this. So the rules are that there are 9 tasks on the left. Each task needs to be done by a different person on each team. And so each team member is doing 1 or 2 tasks. And so this gets people talking about like, what are their strengths? What do they feel comfortable doing? They have to come up with a team strategy plan. And then we just go task through task and have the 4 contestants from each of the teams battle it out. I think very importantly, you can see here that the tasks on the left do not take very long. They're about 5 minutes or less per task. There's also a pretty big range of variety in terms of the skill sets needed for these tasks. So there are the highly athletic things like most push-ups in a minute or the long jump. There are the brainy challenges. So like the fastest person to complete an easy Sudoku puzzle, building a high spaghetti tower out of marshmallows and unbaked spaghetti. And then there's the things that probably people haven't done since kindergarten, like limbo and hula hooping. But again, they're just like low stress. You can be terrible at them and no one's going to judge you. And there's something there that everyone can do. So here are pictures. This was the hula hooping. We found out that adults are terrible at hula hoops, especially if they're cheap hula hoops. This was the standing long jump. So again, this is just a great photo opportunity to get some of these for later. These were our brainy tasks. So we've got a resident here building his spaghetti tower and then 4 interns competing with the Sudoku challenge. Then, of course, no Olympics would be complete without a medal ceremony. And so you can see that our 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place teams here got their gold, silver, and bronze medals. These were very cheap off of Amazon. Our 4th place team did not get medals, and they felt that they should have their group picture taken by the trash can. So that's where their group picture was taken. All right, moving on to the PGY2 retreat. This one, again, is focused on supervisor and leadership training with, again, the emphasis on camaraderie building. Now, this retreat's a little different. We have had this teaching to teach seminar in our curriculum for probably 20 or 25 years. So it already existed. We were already doing the work, but to make it a class-specific retreat, we just added in a little bit of fun and slapped on a happy hour at the end and called it a retreat. And it's worked out really, really well. So this retreat happens in December of every year. This is just a half-day retreat. So we have our residents do their clinical shifts in the morning. They're excused starting at 1 p.m., usually on a Friday. We do the harder, deeper stuff throughout the day just on campus to save money. And then we have a happy hour at the end, and residents are excused from clinical duties until the next morning. We start ours with a large group presentation talking about teaching to teach and strategies for being an effective leader and an effective supervisor and relaying our expectations for our residents as supervisor residents. This retreat's then structured differently. So this is done in small groups. We break our residents into 5 small groups and they spend 40 minutes each rotating through 5 different stations. So 3 of these stations are highly designed around simulation and role play. And so we have standardized students come in and we have emphases on giving feedback, how to identify and manage a struggling learner, and then emphasis on how to teach on the fly via teaching the 1-minute preceptor micro skills. We also have the chiefs do another high yield chiefs section, like what they wish they would have known as they started supervising. And then for fun, a couple years ago, we added in an escape room. We are very lucky to have an educational designer here who likes games and puzzles. And so he was able to create one for us that we just do in the simulation lab. It's medically based, but the puzzles are just kind of fun. And this is just a good mental break as residents rotate through the heavier role-playing stations, and it allows for some team building and some natural leadership to emerge. And then again, we close, get a group picture, and then we, the last couple years, have had our happy hour at Topgolf. So we're located in Omaha, Nebraska. It's been really hard to plan a winter retreat during COVID that is like doable with the weather, and Topgolf fit the bill for this for us because it's outdoors. It was COVID compliant, but there are heaters, and so we could get away with this. It's also, again, a low stress environment for residents that love hitting golf balls. They can do that. For residents that just want to sit and eat and drink and have fun and hang out, they can do that as well. And then you can see here's our group pictures from the actual half day. Okay, last but not least, I'll go through our senior resident retreat. For this retreat actually came from a totally different angle. So this retreat is made up of a bunch of small things that we had spread throughout our curriculum, but we didn't feel like where they were at in the noon conference didactic time slots or in other places that they were making sense. And so we plucked them out of that curriculum, formed them together on this dedicated half day to our seniors. And through this retreat, again, we're focusing on that transition out of residency. So we're talking about boards preparation and getting ready for your job or your fellowships after residency, financial planning, but fast forwarding 2 years from their intern level financial planning talk, and then camaraderie building again. So here was our schedule from the past year. This retreat for us always takes place in June or July of the senior year. I think that's important to note because residents are starting to think and prepare for their transition out of residency. They also have a year of residency left. And so I had to think about that timeline as we were figuring out what actually fits here and what doesn't. For us, we ended up designing the following. So this is, again, a half-day retreat. Residents work in the morning. They come, the afternoon session is on campus, and then we do off-campus happy hour. We start off with an introduction, something to get people talking. This year we lucked out because we were revising our program's mission statement. So we took this opportunity to ask our senior residents their input on what they think should go into our program's mission statement. And we spend time talking about curriculum vitae, what to include, what not to include, how to format those, and cover letters if people are applying for jobs. We spend time talking about board preparation, so strategies for making study schedules, what to expect from boards, when to sign up, specifically how boards might differ if you are starting fellowship versus starting a job, and the timing of starting a job. This year, we just squeezed in 15 minutes to talk about Zoom interviewing because we realized that class of residents had interviewed in person for residency. And so no one had talked to them about how you Zoom professionally for an interview and what to expect. The financial planning session we do for this class highlights more of those bigger level questions. So starting to actually think about retirement, starting to think about disability insurance, umbrella insurance, life insurance, if they haven't done that yet. Thinking about how their budget might need to change, especially if their salary is going to quintuple over the next year, and what to do with that to be responsible. And then loan repayment that kind of goes alongside with that. We schedule the group picture so that we make sure it happens. And then the last hour, we have spent time doing panel presentations. So we break up the residents into those who plan to go into fellowship and those who plan to go into general internal medicine jobs right after residency. And they're able to ask questions to their panelists about how they got their most out of their senior year, what that transition was like, what they've learned in their first couple of years of either fellowship or their jobs. And that's been really well received. And then again, we plan some sort of a happy hour to end the day with fun. So here's a picture from our senior retreat this past year. We took our group picture outside of our medical school building, and then we've got our residents here enjoying happy hour at Corkscrew. Okay, so with that, I'll hand it over to Erin to talk through the logistics.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to talk about more of the details on how you schedule it, budget, all those fun things. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, first, when to schedule. So you want to think about the best timing for the content of the retreat. So like Ray and Trek said earlier, our first year retreat, we have early in the academic year, and it's really kind of reintroducing things to the interns that they forgot from orientation. Another example, our Teaching to Teach retreat. We have that in December of each year because our second year residents start supervising in January. So you want to think about things like that when you're determining when you want to have the retreat. And then of course you want to consider when your rotation schedules are released, when you want vacation requests in from the residents, when clinic schedules are made, and any other activities happening in the month when you schedule. You want to avoid having a lot of coverage schedules, especially for your chiefs wellness. So for example, the month that we have our in-training examination, we usually don't have our intern retreat. So we make sure that we plan around anything that's already going on. Also, keep in mind that half-day retreats are easier logistically in terms of coverage schedules. So we have one full-day retreat, which is our intern retreat, but then the upper-level retreats, we have half-day retreats, which is a much easier thing to schedule. And then you need to consider local events in your area. And I'm actually going to let Ray chime in here for a second.
So for any of you who are acquainted with Nebraska, you know that our lives revolve around the Husker football schedule. And I made the mistake last year of planning our intern retreat the same weekend it's always been, but it was when we had a week 0 Husker game day. And the Husker game was at 11:30, which was very disruptive to the normal timing of the retreat. So we actually had to replan the entire retreat agenda around the Husker game. You guys might not have that problem in your states, but it was a big problem here.
All right, and next we'll move to planning your itinerary. So you want to think about any curriculum gaps. We kind of talked about earlier. Some things you want to teach in your program don't lend themselves well to a noon conference didactic schedule. So Teaching to Teach is one example. We've always had that be a separate half day. We just turned it into a retreat because it really doesn't fit well into our 1 hour didactic schedule. So that's a good, think about things like that in terms of getting ideas for your retreats. Consider resident comments or requests in past program alumni or retreat surveys. Your retreat surveys are great. You're going to get lots of feedback specific to the retreats in those surveys, but you can also find a lot of ideas in your program evals and your alumni surveys. Residents always comment on what they wish they would have had. So look at those too when you're trying to plan your itinerary. Consider your setup time when determining the start time of your retreat. So for this, our intern retreat takes more setup time typically than our upper level retreats. And that's because we set up a bunch of lawn games at a venue we used to use in the past, not in the pictures that Ray showed. We had to set up the table, get the tables and chairs set up. We had to set up our computer equipment. We set up snack areas, the lawn games. And so you don't want to set your retreat too early to where you're getting up extra early for setup. So just consider all the setup time when you're making the start time. How can you make it fun? Our Teaching to Teach retreat, it's a pretty didactics heavy day, but we did incorporate an escape room into it. And it's one of our breakout sessions, and it's actually probably one of the most popular things of that retreat. With the intern retreat, we have the intern Olympics, we have the lawn games. So just think about how you can incorporate fun and have something fun throughout the day. So it's not like 4 hours of didactics and then you get to do something social. Just kind of spread it out a little bit. Allow for breaks and provide snacks. Residents love food, as we all know. So often Ray or I would go to Costco and buy a bunch of snacks for these retreats. It was a really cheap way to have snacks, and snacks just make people happy. Incorporate a social activity, and you can do this just with your residents. During COVID, we had to kind of limit it to just the resident class for the retreat, or you can invite family members, you can invite faculty or residents. I'll talk about that more when we get to budget. Identify people to lead activities. So Ray mentioned the financial planning talk when she was talking about the agenda. You want to find someone who can give that talk that is going to be unbiased, but also is going to be able to plan a talk that fits with the level of training. So your first year residents, they're getting their first paycheck, and that looks a lot different than your residents that are about to graduate. And then of course you want to consider your vendor policy when you're scheduling any sort of outside speakers. So do not underestimate the importance of your chief residents. This picture is our current chief residents. The chiefs are relatable to the residents. They have a lot of pearls that they can share with them. So make sure you have them included as leaders in the retreats, but also particularly with your interns, they may feel more comfortable with the chiefs in terms of expressing their anxiety or concerns with residency than they would with program directors. So make sure you have your chiefs heavily involved. It's also good for relationship building. Again, with your interns, it's a great way to kick off the year and build those relationships between the chiefs and the interns and just set yourself up for a really good year. And then they're your schedule masters. They're going to be making these coverage schedules. So make sure you involve them from the very, very beginning of the planning process. You may need to bribe them, but they're really helping you out a lot with the schedules. So next slide. Identifying a location. So first of all, consider the purpose of your retreat. We mentioned earlier that we try to get our interns off campus. We do a lot of team building activities. It's the summertime. We want to get people outside. So for our upper level retreats, those are more didactics heavy retreats, and we actually keep them on campus. So think about what fits with what you're focusing on in your retreat. Will there be breakout sessions? And if so, you want to make sure that you have your rooms pretty close together if possible, just to help with the traffic flow. Does your venue offer IT support or equipment? This is a big one that you might not think to ask when you're scheduling a venue, but some venues don't provide this. So often probably you're not going to have IT support, but you may need to rent a projector. You may need to bring a computer. You may need to bring special computer cords. You want to make sure that there's a screen there. So just make sure you ask all of those questions. What time of year is the retreat being held? So for our intern retreat, it's in the summertime. Because of that, we make sure that we plan appropriately. We bring sunscreen. Do not rely on your residents to remember sunscreen. So bring sunscreen. We used to have it at a forest. There were a lot of trails and it was just a fun area. So we brought bug spray for the residents as well. So just consider your weather. Also, this kind of goes along with my next point on parking. But if it's a winter retreat, don't pick a place for your social outing that has really tough parking, because you don't want your residents having to walk a long way in the bitter cold or in the snow. So just consider parking with your weather as well. And then transportation, make sure that your residents have a way to get to the retreats, and consider transportation time. Our very first retreat we had was about, I don't know, probably 30 minutes away. So consider that when you're planning the start time of the retreat as well. We talked about incorporating a social activity or happy hour to your didactics heavy retreats. We do this with all of our retreats. It just gives your residents time to have fun with their peers or colleagues. Will you be serving alcohol? If so, ask your venue if you need to have a security guard, because many venues will require security guards if you're serving alcohol. Catering, and usually they'll tell you that. Catering limitations, some venues make you use a certain caterer where others will let you bring in your own food or outside caterer. Usually if they require a certain caterer, it's going to be a little bit more expensive than what you could do on your own planning. And then COVID restrictions, that might dictate how many rooms you need. It might dictate if things need to be inside or outside. So definitely consider COVID restrictions as well. Budget. So obviously your most expensive items on the budget are going to be the venue and food and drinks. So if you're providing alcohol, consider drink tickets if you have a tight budget versus an open bar. Supplies for your retreat activities. A lot of times we go to Costco or we order on Amazon, and I actually created a bin in my office where we would save supplies and just reuse them year after year. If anyone went into my office and looked at it, they would really wonder what I'm doing at work to see rope and dog toys and blindfolds and a beach ball, but those are all things we have used for icebreakers. COVID requirements, you may need to purchase more masks or hand sanitizer. You would think everyone would have a mask by now, but you may need to bring those. Hand sanitizer. COVID may require that you have individually boxed meals, which is more expensive usually than having a buffet. If you have outside speakers, you may have speaker fees. You may have to rent a projector screen. You may have to rent tables or chairs. So those are all things to consider. Again, if you're serving alcohol, you may have to pay for a security guard, which usually isn't too expensive, but is still another thing to consider in your budget. And then additional people you're inviting to your social event, this can really drive up costs. So we've done everything. We've invited core faculty to the social event. We've allowed family to come to the social event, and we've invited resident classes. So if it's the intern retreat, the upper level classes, we've invited the other resident classes. But this is all something that you really want to think about with budget, because it's really going to drive up costs depending on who you're going to allow to come to your social event. If your budget is limited, book rooms on your own campus. That's what we do for our second and third year retreats. Plan a happy hour instead of a dinner. We always do a happy hour. One thing that we do for our half day retreats is we start after lunch, which keeps us from having to buy lunch for the residents. So we still do our happy hour, but we start the retreat usually at 1 p.m. so we don't have to buy lunch too. And then if you just don't have money for a happy hour or a dinner, just set up some fun competition at the end of the retreat. Have a game night or have a trivia night or something fun that the residents can do. All right, do not underestimate the importance of detailed instructions, and be very, very, very specific. So you'll want to tell them what to bring. Should they bring paper, pens? Can they bring outside food and drinks? The year that we had the strict catering rule, they couldn't bring their coffee, they couldn't bring soda. And so we had to make sure we let them know that. Be specific on what they should wear, even if it seems like common sense to you. So if you're having a retreat that's during the summertime and you're going to be outside doing a lot of activities, you may want to suggest shorts and tennis shoes because they may not think to wear that. So be very specific about what to wear. If you say that families can attend a social event, be specific on what you mean. Do you only mean significant others, or do you mean children or pets? Because we've had all of those show up at a social event. So make sure that you're specific on what family means. And then breakout rooms. So you need to be really specific on your rotation schedule with breakout rooms. And you do not want a class to go to the wrong breakout room, because it's going to throw your whole day off for the remainder of the day. So it probably isn't a bad idea to have someone monitor traffic. I know I showed up one time to a retreat and it got off schedule, and I just turned around and walked back to my office because it was a mess. So just make sure you're very, very specific on what room they go to next, and have someone kind of make sure that they're following that. And then, of course, don't forget dietary restrictions when you're planning food so that you accommodate everyone.
Okay, so I think our last slide is just a quick summary of the top 10 tips out of all of this that we've covered, the things that we think are most helpful to allow for your retreat days to be successful. The first thing is just planning way far ahead. So some of our retreats, we can get by planning just like 2-3 months ahead. Some of them we need to plan about 6 months ahead, and it just all depends on what's going on that month, where the chief's at in their schedule are making. In the past, we find out how hard it is to coordinate schedules. And so if we want our program directors to be there, our chiefs to be there, every single resident to be there, if possible, then sometimes that requires 6 months of planning just to get that date on the calendar and keep it reserved for people. For the second thing, we recommend designating a clear quarterback to oversee the retreat. I put this in the comment, but I just think it helps because you've got a lot of things that are coming together, and at the end of the day, you want them to flow well. You want that balance to be there. You want to make sure that what you're actually trying to accomplish, that you're going to accomplish. And so someone overseeing all of that is really important. Now, this could be program leadership, this could be core faculty, this could be a chief resident, but whoever has an interest in this and is good at scheduling and coordinating. Third thing, we already mentioned the vast importance of incorporating your chief residents. They make things fun. Residents relate to them a little bit better. And they are just more in tune with what residents want and how they're doing, and are invaluable to this sort of a setup. I highly recommend that you coach all of your speakers ahead of time. In the past, there have been times I thought I gave kind of direct advice on what to talk about, and then we give them an hour and they have been a little bit off target, or maybe they've targeted their topic to the wrong level. And so I'd recommend, if you're bringing in different people, especially if they don't know residents as well, that you're telling them exactly what you want them to cover and how that's going to balance with things before and after them. Erin just talked about the importance of being extra specific with instructions to residents. I think it's funny, every year there's something we're like, well, I guess we'll add that to the instructions for next year. Whoops, live and learn. Sixth, include food. I think caffeine is really important, whether you have residents bring their own or you provide it. I would definitely consider alcohol. Obviously, that depends on the culture of your program, but I think that having that available in a safe and responsible form can just help people to loosen up and enjoy the day. It was really funny. The first year we introduced the Intern Olympics, the specific advice I got with that was that the happy hour should never be separated from the Intern Olympics. And so the way we do that is we open up our open bar right before the Intern Olympics. And that way they can have their first drink as they're participating in the Intern Olympics. And then it flows into the rest of the happy hour and was just really smooth and fun. We talked about intermixing games and lighter activities with some of the heavier activities you might choose to tackle. 8, the important thing we'll say here is if you want something to happen, like a group picture, make sure you just put it in the itinerary. Otherwise, someone might forget, and then you're going to be bummed that you got all of these residents off of their clinical rotations in one place at one time, and then you forgot to take that group picture. So if you schedule it, it's more likely to happen. Alongside this, I would designate a photographer for the day. So, tell a chief resident and someone else, hey, walk around with your cell phone and just make sure you're snapping pictures. And then we can steal from those what'll be helpful for social media, for future recruitment. But that way you'll have those pictures at the end of the day. And then last but not least, I recommend that you get resident feedback so that you can modify future retreats and make them better. So Erin and I would design like a Survey Monkey survey we would send out just 3 or 4 days after the retreat. It was really quick, but it just asked for their input on the different elements of the retreat, things that they would recommend that we consider adding, things that maybe we should change or remove. And this has been really helpful because we have drastically, like I mentioned before, changed the intern retreat. We've gotten some new ideas of things to include for the next year. And I think this helps us stay relevant. Okay, so with that, we're done with the formal portion of this presentation. We've included our email addresses in case you have any specific questions and you'd like to reach out. The recording will be available, and I will also send some examples of our itineraries and some of our icebreakers to Sheila that she can put on the AAM website if you want to look at those more closely. But with that, we're happy to take any questions, comments, if you want to share things you've done at your institution that have been successful. We'll just take the next 10-15 minutes to encourage discussion.
Yeah, for the first one, Ray, what have you learned about icebreakers?
Oh, okay. So I'm sure you have all done icebreakers that you hate and icebreakers that have been fun and fine. I think icebreakers need to get people talking, but not sharing too deep of information. I think that you need to not spend too much time on them, or they feel like you're just kind of like beating a dead horse, if that makes sense. One of the favorites we do at our intern retreat is really simple. We just take a beach ball, and then they have to throw that around in groups. There's numbers all around the beach ball. When they catch the beach ball, wherever their thumb lands on that number, they get asked a question. The question's really simple. It's like, what's your favorite cereal? Or what was your very first job? And then that way they have to say their name and answer the question, but it just starts helping with name face recognition. It gets people talking a little bit. We did one year that was timed over kind of Easter. And so we did like a spring egg hunt, and I hid candy and pennies and eggs, had them go pick up eggs for 15 minutes. It did not take adults very long to find the Easter eggs. But then the downside was after they got their eggs, they had to go one by one and share one fact about themselves from each year that their penny was dated. And so if they found 5 eggs, they had to pull up pennies and say like, well, in 1993, I was this many years old and I lived in this town. And then in 2005, I was finishing college and my major was this. And so it just, again, got people talking, but with low stress questions.
Ray, have you had issues getting funding support or department GME leadership?
I guess maybe Erin should answer that question, because Erin manages the budget. She's always said yes to me.
We made it. we are lucky that GME provides an operating budget to each program, and we just fit it within our operating budget. And I think, I don't know, it hasn't been a challenge for us in terms of getting leadership support for these retreats, because they really are beneficial to the training program in all the ways that we've talked about in this presentation. But in terms of funding, we just built it into our operating funding, which has been easier because our operating didn't actually drop during COVID. And so we've had a little bit, since we haven't done in-person recruitment, we've had a little bit of funding that we can put towards these retreats. But of course, if in-person comes back, it'll have to be watched pretty closely.
Others have feedback on how to get leadership on board? All right. Ray, how do you make it mandatory?
Someone answered this. So Krista Pike, I agree with you completely. We tell all our residents ahead of time, unless you're on vacation. So, I mean, obviously, if your sister is getting married, then you're excused from the retreat that day if you've already asked for vacation. But if we're providing clinical coverage for you, then we expect you to be there. I make it very specific which part of the retreat is mandatory. And then again, they can leave for the happy hour if they don't want to stay. Every class is a little bit different, but I think usually 75 to 85% of the people choose to stay for happy hour. And then the others can go home and spend time with their family or doing something else. Someone else asked about how we get feedback. We used to use SurveyMonkey, but there's some red tape with SurveyMonkey more recently. So now the last couple of years, I've just used a Microsoft Forms survey format. And that's been pretty simple and easy to use and then like adapt every year without having to recreate it. Yeah, Krista, we've had the same thing. So sometimes our residents are on like a staycation and they've already requested it, but they don't actually have anything that they're doing. And so they choose to come. And then if they do that, we give them a day of vacation back because technically they're at a work activity. So. Any other questions or suggestions or things you'd like to share with the people? Okay, well, I don't think there's any harm in ending a few minutes early. Again, please write down our emails and feel free to email us if we can be helpful, or if you want to share anything with us. We always are looking for new ideas. And then we will try to get some helpful content posted along with this recording in case you can use that. So everyone have a great day. Good luck as we continue to build up and train our residents.
Thank you, Sheila. May not be on.